Hey guys, tonight we take a journey back in time to an era of confusion, fear, and incredible suffering. A time when disease swept through societies, killing millions, and humanity had no idea how to stop it. It's hard to imagine a time before medicine, when we didn't know how viruses spread or what caused illness. Today, we know the importance of vaccines, quarantines, and sanitation. But in the past, people had only their beliefs, their fears, and their faith to try and fight the terrible plagues that ravaged their communities. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to hear where you're listening from tonight. Share your location and time zone in the comments below. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the world of the ancient people, diseases were a mystery. They didn't have the benefit of advanced science or medicine. So how did they make sense of the plagues that struck their lands? The answer lies in their superstitions and spiritual beliefs. Most early civilizations believed that illness was a punishment from the gods. When a plague swept through a village or city, people would assume they had angered the gods, and it was a divine retribution. In ancient Greece and Rome, disease was often attributed to anger from the gods or the influence of evil spirits. People didn't understand germs or bacteria, so they believed that illness could be caused by a curse or bad omens. A sudden outbreak would often result in mass panic, and rituals would be performed to try and appease the gods. Sacrifices, prayers, and offerings to the deities were common, with the hope that by pleasing the gods, the plague would stop. Imagine standing in a temple, surrounded by incense and the cries of the desperate. As you try to beg for mercy from gods who seem so far out of reach, the Hebrews also believed that plagues were sent by God as punishment for sin. The Old Testament describes many instances where God sent plagues to punish the people of Israel or other nations for their disobedience. The most famous of these plagues, of course, was the 10 plagues of Egypt, when Moses called down a series of catastrophic events upon the land of Egypt to convince Pharaoh to let the Israelites go free. This story had a deep impact on how people of the time viewed illness. Disease was not just an unfortunate event, but a sign of divine anger. And yet, despite their faith and rituals, the plagues continued. The people of ancient times were left to face the reality of their helplessness. It wasn't just divine wrath they feared, it was the unknown. They had no idea how diseases spread. If a plague began in one area, it could easily spread to another, wiping out entire communities. There were no public health systems, no doctors who understood how diseases were transmitted. All people could do was hope that their gods would show mercy, or perhaps that a miracle would save them, in the absence of any scientific understanding. Astrology also played a huge role in medical thinking. The ancient Greeks and Romans were deeply entrenched in astrological beliefs, and they often looked to the stars to predict the onset of diseases. Hippocrates, the famous Greek physician, believed that the stars and the alignment of planets affected the health of individuals and communities. People would consult astrologers to determine the best times for treatments, or when an outbreak was likely to occur based on the positions of celestial bodies. If a plague occurred, it was often seen as a sign that the stars were in the wrong alignment. Remedies, then, weren't just about treating symptoms. They involved aligning oneself with the heavens through rituals, charms, and sometimes astronomical charts. Bloodletting, for example, was sometimes done under specific astrological conditions to remove the evil humors that were believed to cause illness. While the science behind astrology has long been debunked, it shows just how deeply ingrained mystical thinking was in ancient medical practices. One of the few practical approaches ancient people had in dealing with plagues was quarantine, though they didn't fully understand how diseases spread. Early civilizations did recognize that certain areas or people could be infected while others remained healthy. In response, isolating the sick or infected areas became a common method to control the spread of disease. In ancient Rome, for example, the authorities would quarantine ships that arrived from ports affected by disease, forbidding them to dock until they were deemed safe. Perhaps the most famous example of this came during the Black Death in medieval Europe, while the concept of quarantine wasn't fully developed at the time. Authorities began to establish quarantine stations and isolation areas to try and prevent the plague from spreading. Ships coming into the port were often held offshore for 40 days, known as a quarantina, hence the origin of the word quarantine. The idea was that if the ship had been carrying the disease, by isolating it for 40 days, it could prevent it from infecting the population. While quarantine was an important method for controlling the spread of disease, it was far from perfect. The Black Death, which struck Europe in the 14th century, swept through the continent in just a few short years, claiming millions of lives. The methods used to try and stop the plague quarantine, isolation, and religious rituals were largely ineffective because they did not address the true cause of the disease bacteria spread by fleas on rats. The ancient people's responses to plagues show us just how powerless they often felt in the face of nature's wrath. They had no understanding of germs, viruses, or bacteria, and no way to prevent or cure the diseases that took so many lives. However, what we can take from their struggles is their resilience and the ways in which their beliefs shaped the world they lived in. The rituals, quarantines, and astrological readings they employed were attempts to impose order on a world that seemed chaotic and beyond their control. As you close your eyes tonight and let the gentle rhythm of the night take you deeper into sleep, think about the incredible strength of those ancient people. They faced dangers far beyond what we could imagine. Yet they found ways to cope. The legacy of their struggle against plagues and diseases paved the way for the advancements in medicine and public health that we benefit from today, tomorrow when you wake up. Remember that we are standing on the shoulders of those who fought to survive and overcome, and every step we take forward is a testament to their endurance and hope. As the night deepens and you settle into a peaceful state, let's continue our journey through time, where ancient people were forced to contend with plagues and epidemics with little more than their faith, superstitions, and trial and error. In the face of terrifying disease outbreaks, people had to rely on whatever knowledge they had, whether that be divine intervention, mystical remedies, or rudimentary medical practices. We've already touched on the methods used to address these plagues, such as quarantines and religious rituals. But what about the more unusual and sometimes disturbing treatments that people relied on to cure their ailments? Let's explore some of the most surprising and bizarre practices used by ancient civilizations in their attempts to fight the deadly plagues. One of the most infamous and controversial methods of plague treatment was the practice of bloodletting. The ancient Greeks and Romans, including the famous physician Hippocrates, believed that diseases were caused by an imbalance of the four humors blood: phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to this theory, illness was a result of these humors being out of balance, and bloodletting was thought to restore harmony by removing excess blood. When plagues struck, bloodletting became a widespread treatment. Ancient healers would use leeches, razors, or knives to drain blood from patients in an attempt to rid the body of toxins. For many, the practice only worsened their condition, but for centuries, it was the go-to treatment for everything from fevers to infectious diseases. Surprisingly, this practice didn't die out immediately. Even in the early 19th century, bloodletting was still being used in Western medicine to treat diseases. Even as it became increasingly clear that it was ineffective and harmful, the treatment was based on a flawed understanding of human biology. But at the time, it was one of the few tools that ancient people had to combat the ravaging effects of disease. In addition to bloodletting, another common practice was the use of herbal remedies and folk treatments. Ancient people often turned to the natural world for solutions to their ailments. The belief was that plants and herbs contained healing powers that could counteract the disease. Some remedies were effective, while others were questionable at best. For example, during outbreaks of the plague, people would drink concoctions made from herbs like wormwood, sage, and garlic in hopes of warding off infection. Garlic, in particular, was widely believed to be a powerful antiseptic and was commonly used to treat everything from coughs to wounds. While garlic does indeed have medicinal properties, it certainly wasn't a cure-all for the diseases that ravaged ancient civilizations. But beyond herbs, some remedies were far more bizarre in medieval Europe. It was believed that wearing a clove-studded pomander or carrying amulets filled with herbs could protect against disease. People also used plague water, a mixture of herbs and spirits, which was thought to prevent infection. And in times of extreme desperation, people would turn to superstitions, like burning holy incense or praying for a miracle. To rid themselves of the plague, then, there were those who turned to more extreme measures. The ancient Chinese, for example, employed a practice known as moxibustion, where burning herbs were applied to the skin in specific locations to treat illness. The treatment was thought to restore the body's balance by improving circulation and relieving stagnation. It was sometimes used during epidemics, and while it might have provided some relief, it certainly wasn't a cure for the deadly diseases people were facing. At the same time, in ancient Egypt, medical practitioners relied on a variety of methods, including trepanation, drilling holes into the skull to release evil spirits that were thought to cause illness. This procedure was often used during times of plague, though it was more of a ritualistic treatment than a medical solution, despite the danger involved. Many believed that it was a necessary measure to save their loved ones, but perhaps the most disturbing practices came from ancient Europe during the Black Death, as the plague swept across the continent. The desperation for any form of treatment led to practices that were not only futile but also gruesome. For instance, people believed that flagellation, whipping themselves or each other, could appease the wrath of God and prevent the plague. This practice was so widespread that groups of flagellants would march through towns and cities, publicly punishing themselves in an effort to atone for the perceived sins that caused the plague. Though flagellation was rooted in religious fervor, it also became a public spectacle, drawing crowds who believed they could somehow benefit from the atonement of others. Unfortunately, the plague continued to spread, and the practice did little to stop the catastrophic deaths that were occurring. In the face of these terrifying diseases and superstitions, people had little understanding of the actual causes of illness. There was no concept of germs or viruses instead. Illness was attributed to divine punishment or bad air, and treatments were based on the belief that the body's humors or spirit needed to be balanced. Modern medicine as we know it today, based on scientific principles, evidence, and understanding, didn't exist. Yet, despite the terrible mistakes and misguided treatments, there were some bright spots of progress. Some ancient treatments, such as the use of herbs and the understanding of basic hygiene principles, laid the foundation for future medical advancements. And perhaps most importantly, the belief in spiritual healing, whether through prayer or ritual, showed that ancient people had a strong belief in the power of community, faith, and hope during times of extreme crisis. As you drift off into sleep tonight, think about the ways ancient societies grappled with the unseen enemy of disease. Though their methods may seem strange or even barbaric by modern standards, they were acting with the limited knowledge they had. Hope and faith were often their last line of defense, and they did what they could with the tools they had at their disposal. Tomorrow, as you wake up, remember that the struggles of the past have led us to the understanding we have today. We now know how to fight diseases with vaccines, sanitation, and antibiotics, tools that ancient people could only dream of. Their journey through plagues paved the way for the breakthroughs in medicine that save lives today. As the night continues and you settle deeper into rest, let's explore the grim reality that ancient people faced during plagues, and how their efforts, no matter how misguided, ultimately paved the way for the medical advancements we now take for granted. While we've already explored how people dealt with plagues through religion, rituals, and early medical treatments, there were still significant struggles that shaped modern healthcare. In the absence of knowledge about germs and infection, ancient civilizations relied on intuitive but ultimately incorrect methods of healing. Yet, despite the failures of many treatments, they also laid the groundwork for the scientific methods we use to battle diseases today. Let's take a closer look at how plagues in ancient times weren't just battles against disease, but were also battles for survival and meaning when the Black Death descended upon Europe. It wasn't just a medical emergency, it was a spiritual crisis. People didn't just seek cures, they sought answers. Many believed that the plague was God's punishment for sin, and thus, seeking forgiveness was just as important as seeking medical remedies. This belief led to massive religious movements, where flagellants and religious zealots took to the streets. Believing that self-purification through pain would save them from God's wrath, they would march through towns, whipping themselves publicly in a desperate attempt to purge the sin of the world. Though this didn't stop the plague, it reflected the desperation of a population who had no way of understanding what was happening. It was a deeply human response, a search for meaning in the face of seemingly uncontrollable death. In the Middle Ages, during the Black Death, communities tried to segregate the sick in quarantine, as we mentioned earlier. But there was little understanding of infection control at the time. Entire villages were wiped out, often because people didn't understand the need for personal hygiene or the importance of cleaning wounds. In fact, the spread of disease was exacerbated by the lack of sanitation people lived in, crowded. Unsanitary conditions. Public baths were shared by the sick and healthy alike, and waste often piled up in the streets, creating the perfect environment for disease to spread. Yet, in the face of these horrific conditions, there were still efforts made to improve public health. For instance, in some parts of the world, leaders began to build hospitals and quarantine facilities for those infected with the plague, though rudimentary by today's standards. These early health institutions were the precursors to the modern hospitals we rely on today. The effort to separate the infected and protect the healthy was a precursor to what would later become standard epidemic containment strategies. And while we know now that clean water and good sanitation are essential for preventing the spread of disease, this knowledge didn't exist in ancient times. Instead, people turned to what they could: herbal remedies and potions made from whatever plants were available. Ancient Chinese medicine, for example, believed in the healing properties of various herbs to strengthen the body's immune system. These remedies were often used to help people fight off the plague, though they lacked the efficacy we know today. However, some ancient practices were not entirely in vain in certain cultures. People started to recognize the importance of diet and nutrition in maintaining health. The ancient Egyptians, for example, had extensive knowledge of herbal medicine, and many of their remedies are still used in modern herbal practices today. These early approaches to preventative care were some of the first steps in a journey that would eventually lead to our modern understanding of public health and nutrition. As time passed, the role of doctors and healers became increasingly important. In ancient Greece and Rome, the emergence of professional physicians marked a shift in medical practice. The Hippocratic Oath, for example, set the standard for how physicians should treat their patients with respect and care. Though ancient doctors did not have the knowledge we have now, they laid the foundation for ethical medical practices, many of which still guide modern doctors today. In ancient Rome, Galen, a Greek physician, became one of the most influential medical figures of his time. He not only studied human anatomy, but also practiced surgical techniques and developed methods of medication that were used for centuries. Galen's writings on diseases, symptoms, and treatments formed the backbone of medical education for over 1,000 years. While his understanding of diseases was far from perfect, His efforts to systematically approach medicine paved the way for future breakthroughs. As time moved on, quarantines and sanitation measures became more sophisticated, but the struggle against plagues didn't end with the medieval period. In fact, the world would face many more deadly outbreaks in the centuries that followed, each leaving a lasting impact on the global approach to disease and medicine. The plague would rear its head again and again, but each time, people learned more about how to respond. The Age of Exploration, which began in the 15th century, spread European diseases to the New World, devastating native populations. However, this also led to the global exchange of medicinal knowledge as new cultures interacted. Herbal remedies, vaccines, and public health strategies were shared and adapted. This exchange of knowledge led to an increase in medical progress, and despite the brutality of the times, these interactions helped develop a more interconnected global approach to combating disease. The fight against diseases continued through the centuries, and each successive plague gave humanity a new sense of urgency. We learned how to combat diseases like smallpox, cholera, and yellow fever. But it wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that modern medicine truly began to form with the advent of vaccines, antibiotics, and sanitation standards. It was the hardships of earlier times, the suffering, and the tragedy that ultimately propelled the world toward the scientific breakthroughs we know today. So, as you relax into sleep tonight, remember that the battle against disease is not new. The ancient world faced plagues and epidemics just as we do today, but they lacked the tools and knowledge we now have. What they did have, however, was the unshakable will to survive and to find meaning in the face of death. Those ancient efforts laid the foundation for modern medicine and public health. And through their pain, we learned valuable lessons. May you sleep soundly tonight, knowing that while we have made tremendous progress, the journey is never truly over. The past reminds us that learning from our mistakes and caring for one another are the keys to building a healthier, more compassionate world. As we continue through the quiet of the night, reflecting on the past struggles against plagues, let's shift our focus to the resilience of humanity. Despite the hopelessness of their situation, ancient people found ways to adapt, survive, and even thrive in the face of terrible disease. While they didn't have the medical tools and understanding we have today, they possessed an incredible determination to protect their communities and loved ones from infection. What is fascinating about their story is the ingenuity they employed to address the imminent threat of disease. They may not have understood germs, but they instinctively created strategies that, with modern knowledge, were shown to be quite effective. Quarantine measures, for example, were introduced long before scientific explanations of transmission were developed. In medieval Europe, the Black Death swept across the continent, claiming the lives of millions, while modern scientists know that the plague was spread by fleas on rats. People at the time didn't have the luxury of scientific explanations. So, in an effort to protect themselves, people turned to whatever measures they thought might work. As mentioned before, one of the most infamous responses was quarantine. Cities and towns would seal off their borders to prevent the spread of the disease. Infected houses were marked, and the sick were often isolated from the rest of the population. These measures were critical in slowing the spread of the plague, even if the people at the time didn't fully understand why they worked. Another tactic that was employed during the Black Death was the burning of infected clothing and personal belongings. Though the science of disease transmission wasn't understood, people realized that infected materials could carry the disease. So, burning these items was an attempt to purge the infection from the community. While we now understand the real causes of disease, their response was not entirely misguided. Decontaminating environments remains an important method of stopping the spread of infectious diseases today. In ancient China, quarantine measures were also used in an effort to combat disease outbreaks. However, what's truly fascinating is that the Chinese were also aware of the importance of diet and prevention in keeping the body healthy. They didn't know about germs, but they understood the need for balance in the body, which is why they employed herbal remedies, acupuncture, and dietary modifications as preventive measures. The idea was to keep the body strong and capable of fighting off disease through natural means. It wasn't just in Asia and Europe where such methods were employed. In ancient Egypt, the people believed in the power of spiritual rituals to cleanse the body and the mind from disease. Priests would perform rituals and sacrifices to appease the gods, hoping to remove the disease from their society. While these rituals might not have been effective in the way they hoped, they were often accompanied by practical remedies, such as herbal infusions and medicinal plants, which helped to ease symptoms, even if the root cause of the disease was still unknown. Let's talk about how, even though these ancient people didn't know about viruses or bacteria, their ingenuity and the lessons learned from their trials helped pave the way for modern public health measures. Hygiene, while not fully understood at the time, became an important factor in preventing the spread of disease. People began to see the importance of cleaning wounds, washing hands, and removing waste from their homes and public areas. These basic principles of hygiene and sanitation laid the groundwork for the modern understanding of how diseases spread. The idea of isolation, though primitive, was essential in curbing the spread of disease. This concept is still used today with quarantines during outbreaks of diseases like Ebola, SARS, and more recently, COVID-19. In fact, quarantine measures in medieval times have evolved into the modern isolation protocols we have today. The medieval quarantine of ships and the isolation of infected individuals shows how people, despite their lack of scientific understanding, used practical means to fight plague and disease. These methods have been improved over time, but their origin can be traced back to these ancient practices. But the most important lesson we can take from these ancient responses to plagues is the recognition that healthcare and medicine are deeply rooted in community. People work together, despite their fear, and despite their lack of understanding of the true causes of illness. They shared remedies, cared for one another, and sought help from their religious leaders, healers, and community leaders. The spirit of cooperation during times of crisis is something that resonates even today, in times when we face global pandemics. In ancient societies, disease was not just a medical problem, it was a community issue. When a plague struck, the entire town or city was affected, and everyone had to pitch in. From caregivers to leaders, from the rich to the poor, everyone had to work together to protect the community. That spirit of solidarity is something we can still learn from today. Now, as you relax into sleep tonight, think about how far we've come, from the mysterious diseases of the ancient world to the medical marvels we have today. Humanity's ability to fight back against disease has been shaped by both science and community. The struggle against plagues is not over, but we now face these challenges with the knowledge and tools our ancestors could only dream of. The history of plagues is not just a record of suffering, it's a record of survival, innovation, and human resilience. From the ancient world to the modern era, we've learned how to protect ourselves and improve our health. And while the road was long and filled with tragedy, it is a road that led to the better, healthier world we live in today. So, as you sleep tonight, rest knowing that we stand on the shoulders of those who faced the plagues of the past and overcame them, laying the groundwork for the healthier future that we now enjoy. As the silence deepens, let's turn our attention to the future and the enduring legacy of how humanity has faced plagues and diseases. We've traveled through time, witnessing ancient efforts to combat invisible enemies, but we've also seen how far we've come. Today, we understand viruses, bacteria, and germs in a way ancient people never could. And yet, their determination, resilience, and ingenuity have shaped the public health strategies we rely on now. Looking back at how ancient civilizations responded to plagues, one thing stands clear: the fight against disease has always been as much about community as it has been about science, even before modern medicine. Ancient people recognized the need for collective action, for sharing knowledge, and for caring for one another. Despite their limited resources, they developed methods to isolate the sick, disinfect spaces, and find comfort in religious or spiritual beliefs. These early responses laid the foundation for modern public health systems. But what can we learn from them today? The world is vastly different now, with technologies and treatments that seem almost magical compared to the plague-stricken villages of the past. Still, the core principles of dealing with disease community care, prevention, and adaptation remain timeless. Pandemics, though handled with greater expertise today, are still part of the human experience, from COVID-19 to other global health threats. The lessons from centuries ago continue to guide us. Take a moment to consider how pandemics affect not only public health, but also society as a whole. In ancient times, the social structure often collapsed under the weight of disease. Whole families were wiped out, economies shattered, and societies became fractured as a result of mass death. But resilience, community care, and faith in the collective good saw societies through. These days, while we might have the technological means to contain an outbreak, the emotional toll of a global pandemic still echoes through our lives, just as it was in ancient times. Community support and cooperation remain essential for healing. Now, think about the impact of modern medicine. We've made remarkable strides in treating and preventing diseases that once decimated populations. Vaccines, for instance, have eradicated diseases like smallpox and polio, and antibiotics have helped treat infections that were once death sentences. But the legacy of ancient methods, quarantines, herbal treatments, religious rituals still lingers in our collective consciousness. In times of crisis, we still find ourselves turning to old traditions and practices for comfort, even as we rely on modern medicine for treatment. Perhaps the most important lesson from ancient plagues is the understanding that disease and health are about more than just biology. They're about human connection, care for the vulnerable, and our ability to adapt to an ever-changing world. Today, when faced with a new disease, we rely on not just medicine, but on our shared experiences and mutual aid. History teaches us that survival isn't just about science, it's about togetherness. In many ways, the ancient responses to disease were early attempts to create a society-wide approach to public health. Quarantines, hygienic practices, and communal efforts to contain disease were the first steps toward a modern health system that spans the globe. What we have today, the World Health Organization, global vaccine initiatives, and international cooperation in disease control, was born out of these early efforts to protect human life, though the science was rudimentary. The spirit of those early efforts to protect and care for others has not changed. Now, as we near the end of tonight's journey, take a deep breath as you relax into your bed. Let the history of plagues and disease remind you of how far we've come, and how we continue to build on the work of those who fought to survive against odds we can scarcely imagine. The horrors they faced, their trials and suffering, have led to a world where medicine, technology, and humanity work together to protect us. We live in an age where we understand that healthcare is a right for all, where vaccines and modern treatments save lives, and where community care remains a cornerstone of public health. But we must never forget that we are still standing on the shoulders of those who faced epidemics long before us. The lessons they taught us about resilience, cooperation, and compassion are as important now as they were then. So, as you prepare to drift into a peaceful sleep, let the thought of human resilience fill your dreams. Ancient people may not have understood disease as we do now, but they fought back with everything they had. And in doing so, they laid the groundwork for the world we live in today, one where we continue to battle disease with both science and compassion. Tomorrow, when you wake, remember that the struggle against disease is an ancient one, and each victory we have in healthcare is built on centuries of learning. adapting, and caring for one another. Sleep well, knowing that humanity's fight against plagues and illness continues, but we are stronger for it as the night deepens. Let's take a moment to appreciate the journey we've made together tonight. We've traveled back through time to see how ancient people faced their battles with plagues and disease. They didn't have the knowledge or tools we have today, but their resilience and resourcefulness allowed them to survive against seemingly impossible odds. In their struggle, they left behind a legacy that laid the foundations for modern public health, medicine, and compassionate care. Now, let's take a step back and look at how modern science has continued to evolve as a result of these ancient struggles. The plagues that once decimated entire civilizations have been replaced with global health initiatives, scientific breakthroughs, and international collaboration. The fight against disease is still very much a part of our lives, but we approach it with hope, knowledge, and the invaluable lessons of the past. The rise of vaccines was a turning point in medical history that changed the course of human health forever. In ancient times, the response to disease was often reactionary. It was about surviving the outbreak and doing whatever could be done to protect one's community. But as science advanced, researchers began to understand the cause of diseases, and more importantly, how to prevent them. The development of vaccines, particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries, led to the control and eventual eradication of diseases that had once ravaged populations. The first vaccine, developed by Edward Jenner in 1796, targeted smallpox, one of the deadliest diseases in history. Smallpox had been a persistent threat to humanity for centuries, causing widespread death and disfigurement. Jenner's work, which involved inoculating people with material from cowpox sores to build immunity against smallpox, was a breakthrough that changed the trajectory of global health. Today, smallpox is the first disease to have been eradicated by humans, thanks to vaccination, but Jenner's work was just the beginning. Louis Pasteur, another pioneer in the field of microbiology, made remarkable advances in understanding germs and bacteria. Pasteur's research led to the development of the germ theory of disease, which fundamentally changed the way we approach sanitation and healthcare. It's hard to imagine a time when germs weren't understood as the cause of diseases. But in the past, people believed in a wide range of causes for illness, everything from bad air to spiritual punishment. The invention of antiseptics and the practice of sterilizing medical equipment revolutionized surgery and treatment, drastically reducing the risk of infection. Doctors could now perform operations with a reduced risk of introducing harmful bacteria into the body, which saved countless lives. This was a major step forward in making modern medicine more effective and safe. By the 20th century, antibiotics like penicillin further transformed medicine. Alexander Fleming's discovery in 1928 marked the beginning of a new era of disease treatment. Infections that once claimed lives, such as pneumonia and tuberculosis, could now be treated with powerful drugs. This revolutionized healthcare and reduced the global mortality rate significantly. As the years went on, more vaccines and antiviral drugs were developed, allowing us to fight off diseases like polio, measles, and influenza. And in recent years, the development of treatments for HIV, cancer, and other deadly diseases has continued to improve thanks to the advances built on the foundation laid by scientists like Jenner, Pasteur, and Fleming. Today, we are also facing new challenges, as diseases like COVID-19 remind us that the fight against epidemics and pandemics is never truly over. While the tools we have to combat disease are infinitely more sophisticated than those available to ancient people, the lessons of the past still guide us. The importance of global cooperation, swift action, and public health infrastructure cannot be understated. The lockdowns, social distancing, and vaccine distribution efforts that took place during the COVID-19 pandemic echo the quarantine measures and public health responses from centuries ago. Though the methods have changed, the core principle of protecting public health remains the same. As you settle further into sleep, Let the quiet wisdom of ancient societies fill your dreams. They faced unknown enemies with limited knowledge and tools. Yet they survived and found ways to move forward, from quarantine measures to herbal remedies. They gave it their all, and though many of their methods were flawed, they set in motion the very practices that would evolve into the world of modern medicine. While science and technology have given us the tools to conquer many diseases, we must always remember the lessons of human perseverance and the importance of community. The ancient people's efforts, though sometimes misguided, show us the strength of the human spirit when faced with adversity. Today, we continue to fight new diseases with the same determination and resilience that our ancestors showed in their battles with plague. As you rest, consider how far we've come from plagues to vaccines, from superstitions to scientific breakthroughs. The journey from ancient fear to modern healthcare is long, but it is a testament to the power of learning and adapting. The fight is never truly over, but we are better equipped than ever to face whatever comes next. As the night deepens, let's continue our journey through the history of disease and how ancient people's struggles with plagues shaped the world we live in today. The survival tactics and resilience of ancient civilizations serve as the foundation for the modern medical and public health systems we rely on. Even though they lacked the knowledge and technology we possess now, their ability to adapt and find ways to protect their communities remains a testament to human ingenuity in the face of crisis. Ancient people might not have understood viruses or bacteria, but they understood fear and community survival. The rituals, quarantines, and herbal remedies they used were responses to the unknown. And through these efforts, they laid the groundwork for the medical and public health practices we now know. The history of plagues is as much about our humanity as it is about the advancements we've made in medicine. One of the most striking lessons from the ancient world is how much public health has evolved over the centuries. While ancient people relied on religious ceremonies and spiritual cures to combat plagues, the development of modern public health began with the recognition that prevention was just as important as treatment. Ancient societies may not have known about germs, but they understood that cleanliness and isolation were essential in controlling the spread of disease. The ancient Greeks were among the first to advocate for public hygiene and sanitation. Though their understanding was still primitive, they emphasized the need for clean water and drainage systems, and many Greek cities had public baths where people could wash and purify themselves. While these efforts were not enough to prevent the spread of deadly diseases like the plague, they were an early recognition of the link between cleanliness and health. Fast forward to the 18th century, and the understanding of disease prevention had started to evolve into something more systematic. Edward Jenner's discovery of the smallpox vaccine in 1796 was a pivotal moment in medical history. Jenner, inspired by the observation that milkmaids who had contracted cowpox seemed immune to smallpox, developed the first vaccine, which laid the foundation for modern immunization. This breakthrough not only saved countless lives, but also shifted the focus of medical treatment from mere survival to actual prevention of disease. Though Jenner's discovery was revolutionary, it wasn't until the 19th century that the true importance of hygiene in preventing disease was fully understood. Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch revolutionized medicine by demonstrating the connection between germs and disease. Pasteur's development of the germ theory of disease and Koch's work on isolating pathogens provided the scientific basis for modern sanitation practices. As we move into the 20th century, we begin to see the rise of modern medicine and public health systems. The establishment of vaccination programs, the development of antibiotics, and the improvement of sanitation were all products of a century of progress. The eradication of diseases like smallpox and the near eradication of polio are monumental achievements that show the power of science and public health initiatives working together. However, the struggle is not over. As we know, pandemics and epidemics still affect our world today. The rise of diseases like COVID-19, Ebola, and HIV/AIDS shows us that despite our scientific advancements, we must always remain vigilant. The response to these diseases has drawn heavily from the lessons of the past, implementing quarantines, vaccination campaigns, and global cooperation just as ancient societies relied on their own methods to fight the plagues that ravaged their lands. But here's where the real strength of humanity lies. It's not just about the science we've developed, but also about community, collaboration, and hope. In times of crisis, people come together, just as they did in the face of the ancient plagues, whether through religious rituals, public health measures, or modern medicine. The constant thread through history is the human spirit, our ability to adapt and care for each other. Even in the darkest of times, as you settle deeper into your bed tonight, think about how these ancient responses have shaped the world we live in today. Think about how far we've come, and how we continue to use modern medicine and public health practices to protect our communities. We stand on the shoulders of those who lived before us, learning from their mistakes and victories. When you wake up tomorrow, take a moment to appreciate the progress we've made. We live in a time where diseases that once devastated civilizations are now controlled and treated. Thanks to centuries of struggle, scientific discovery, and compassionate care, we have a better understanding of how to prevent the spread of diseases. The world we live in is far from perfect, but we are better equipped than ever to face new challenges. Tonight, let the legacy of resilience and humanity's adaptability fill your dreams. The ancient responses to plagues may seem primitive to us now, but they were the beginning of the journey toward a healthier, safer world. As you sleep, know that we are continuing that journey, armed with the lessons of the past and the promise of a brighter future. As the night deepens, let's take one more step into the legacy of ancient plagues and how their lessons still resonate with us today. We've witnessed the evolution of how societies fought disease, whether through superstition, quarantines, or herbal remedies, but now, let's reflect on how modern medicine has built upon these early efforts. The struggle against disease has always been as much about humanity as it is about science. The Black Death, the bubonic plague, and other historical pandemics brought the world to its knees. But despite their devastating effects, these outbreaks sparked significant changes in how societies viewed public health. In fact, the plagues of ancient times provided the impetus for some of the most important advancements in medical practice. While ancient people did not understand the mechanics of disease, their experiences helped lay the foundation for what we now call epidemiology, or the study of disease spread in the ancient world. The response to a plague was often rooted in superstition and rituals. With religion being a primary lens through which disease was interpreted, people believed that plagues were sent by the gods to punish them for their sins. And so, they turned to prayers, sacrifices, and rituals to appease the divine. While these methods did little to combat the biological causes of disease, they did offer comfort and a sense of control over an otherwise terrifying and unpredictable force. The ancient Greeks and Romans tried to understand disease through philosophy and natural observation. But it wasn't until the advent of scientific reasoning in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment periods that the true causes of disease started to become clear. Germ theory, which was proposed by Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch in the late 19th century, revolutionized how we understood illness. No longer was disease seen as a punishment from the gods, but as the result of pathogens that could be studied, understood, and ultimately controlled. But we must not forget that it was the plagues of the past that catalyzed these discoveries. In ancient times, the methods used to control disease were based on what little knowledge people had. Quarantine was one of the first responses to disease spread, and though the people of the time didn't understand germs, they recognized that isolating the sick could prevent the further spread of illness. The Black Death in the 14th century led to the establishment of quarantine stations in Mediterranean ports, which helped slow the disease's spread throughout Europe. These early quarantine efforts became the foundation for modern public health systems. Even today, when a disease outbreak occurs, one of the first steps is to isolate affected individuals to prevent further contamination. The lessons learned from ancient quarantine practices are still relevant. As pandemics continue to challenge our societies, COVID-19 is a stark reminder that even in our advanced technological age, the world must still grapple with the threat of infectious diseases, and the tools used to combat them are deeply rooted in history. One of the most interesting aspects of ancient plagues was their psychological impact on societies. People did not just fear the physical effects of disease, they feared the loss of their identity, their community, and their place in the world. The Black Death, for example, didn't just kill millions, it disrupted the social fabric of Europe. Whole families were wiped out, leaving villages deserted, and the moral panic that accompanied the outbreak caused people to turn on each other. Scapegoating became widespread, with Jewish communities in Europe often blamed for the spread of the plague, leading to horrific persecutions. These psychological aspects of disease outbreaks remain relevant today. During the COVID-19 pandemic, for instance, we saw how fear and anxiety could cause social disarray, with individuals hoarding goods, avoiding public spaces, and distrust growing between different social groups. While medical science has advanced, the human response to disease, the fear, the uncertainty, the sense of vulnerability remains unchanged. Today, as we face global health challenges, we continue to lean on the scientific breakthroughs of the past. The World Health Organizations of today stand on the foundation laid by ancient practices. The prevention and containment measures that have been so crucial in combating diseases like COVID-19, Ebola, and HIV were influenced by the lessons learned from centuries of plagues. Modern medicine has the luxury of vaccines, antibiotics, and antiviral treatments. But the principles of hygiene, quarantine, and public health awareness were born in ancient times. It's a testament to the human spirit how, even in the darkest times, people found ways to fight back against the forces that sought to destroy them. So, as you drift deeper into sleep tonight, think about how ancient people, despite their lack of knowledge and resources, developed strategies and methods that paved the way for our modern responses to disease. The plagues they faced were terrifying, but the resilience they displayed is something that lives on in each of us today. The lessons learned from these outbreaks continue to shape our response to modern health crises, and we can take comfort in knowing that humanity has always found a way to survive and overcome, no matter how insurmountable the challenges may seem. Tonight, rest easy, knowing that we continue to grow and learn from the past, making the world a safer, healthier place for future generations. The legacy of survival, resilience, and human compassion will always carry us forward. Sleep well, knowing that we are never truly alone in our fight against the forces that threaten our health and our lives as you drift further into sleep. The quiet night carries with it the echoes of history, a history that's deeply intertwined with the fight against disease. We've explored how ancient people fought plagues and epidemics, and how their methods, though primitive, provided the groundwork for the modern medicine we rely on today. Their struggle against the invisible enemy of disease shaped the path of medicine and public health for centuries to come. In many ways, plagues have been one of the most defining challenges faced by humanity. Each time one ravaged a population, it forced societies to adapt, learn, and change. Ancient responses, from quarantines to herbal remedies, laid the foundation for the world's public health strategies. But it was the modern breakthroughs that have allowed us to conquer diseases that once seemed unbeatable. However, the fight is ongoing. Just as our ancestors battled against the plagues of their time, we too are fighting diseases that emerge today. Some of which, like COVID-19, remind us of how fragile our systems can be in the face of global health crises. But we must not forget that the lessons of the past about resilience, community, and adaptation continue to guide our responses to today's pandemics. One of the most remarkable things about the history of plagues is how societies responded in the face of seemingly impossible challenges. When faced with death on such a massive scale, communities banded together in ways that were both heartwarming and tragic. In the midst of suffering, human connection and solidarity played a vital role in survival. In ancient times, public health responses were mostly local and focused on immediate survival. Plague outbreaks in cities often led to isolation and mass quarantine, as communities tried to prevent the spread of disease. While these responses were rudimentary, they marked the first steps toward the development of public health systems. Over time, the efforts of early medical practitioners, scientists, and government officials led to the global cooperation we have today in fighting diseases. One of the key takeaways from ancient efforts to battle plagues is how resilience emerged in the face of such devastation for the people living through these plagues. Survival wasn't just about physical health, it was about mental strength, community support, and the ability to adapt. The widespread suffering caused by disease forced societies to rethink their structures and priorities. Public health became more about community care than individual treatment. Recognizing that fighting disease required shared responsibility, ancient medical practices, while flawed by today's standards, were built on the idea that health is a community issue, and that lesson remains true today. The Black Death, or any major pandemic in history, wasn't just a matter of a few isolated individuals being affected, it was a societal crisis. The response to these pandemics, whether through religious rituals, quarantines, or simply helping neighbors, showed that community solidarity and mutual aid were vital for survival. This approach is echoed today in our global responses to modern health crises, where cooperation and public health measures are key to overcoming challenges. But just as ancient plagues showed the strength of the human spirit, they also revealed the darker side of society. The fear and panic that followed pandemics often led to scapegoating and blame. During the Black Death, many people believed that the Jews were responsible for spreading the disease, and tragically, many Jewish communities were persecuted, driven from their homes, and murdered. This scapegoating was not unique to the Black Death. It has happened time and again throughout history. Whenever fear and ignorance take hold, in modern times, we see similar patterns in the way some groups are blamed during a pandemic. The stigmatization of certain communities, whether based on race, nationality, or health status, remains a recurring challenge. The history of plagues teaches us the importance of unity, not division, and reminds us to stand together in the face of adversity. Tonight, as you settle into rest, remember that humanity's fight against plagues is a story of survival. The methods we use today, quarantine, vaccination, hygiene practices, and public health cooperation, are all built on the lessons learned through history. From the sacrifices of those who lived through the ancient pandemics to the bravery of those fighting diseases today, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. Let this history inspire you. It's a reminder that no matter how difficult the challenge, no matter how great the fear, humanity's ability to adapt, learn, and care for one another is what has allowed us to survive time and time again. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, think about the strength of those who faced plagues long ago. They might not have had our modern tools, but they had something just as powerful, the will to survive, and the spirit of community. That same spirit lives in us today. We are still learning from the past, and with every new challenge, we continue to rise, to adapt, and to care for each other. Sleep well, knowing that resilience and hope are part of the timeless legacy that will always carry humanity through even the darkest of times, as the quiet hum of the night surrounds you. Let's pause for a moment and reflect on what we've learned from tonight's journey, from the earliest days of plagues to the modern challenges of global health. The story of disease is not just one of suffering, but of resilience, adaptation, and progress, and throughout history. People have faced the terror of unknown diseases, with no understanding of germs or viruses, yet they fought with all their might. Their methods were often flawed, rooted in superstition, religion, and trial and error. But they laid the groundwork for the scientific advancements we now take for granted. Ancient methods, though primitive by today's standards, were the first steps in the evolution of public health systems, sanitation practices, and medical understanding. While the Black Death and other pandemics devastated entire civilizations, they also forced societies to reckon with the importance of community, cooperation, and healthcare. The quarantine measures and isolation practices developed during these outbreaks have evolved into the global systems we now rely on to contain diseases. We owe much of our modern healthcare systems to the plagues of the past, as they forced humanity to rethink how we approach disease, health, and the human body. But the story of ancient disease responses is more than just progress. It's also a reminder of the human condition. During times of fear, people came together, but they also turned on each other. Scapegoating, division, and blame were common, as people sought someone to blame for the suffering they couldn't control. Persecution of minorities, like the Jewish communities during the Black Death, is a tragic part of history that continues to echo in modern times. But in the end, these plagues also showed us the power of solidarity and compassion in the face of adversity. As you rest tonight, think about how the world came together to fight these outbreaks, and how we still do today. The global cooperation seen in the COVID-19 pandemic, the efforts to vaccinate and protect, and the willingness to adapt our societies to prevent the spread of disease are all extensions of the lessons learned from those early attempts to contain plagues. In the darkness, as you drift closer to sleep, let the knowledge that humanity has survived and adapted through centuries of plagues bring you peace. The ancient struggles against disease may seem distant, but the lessons they impart are still with us. We now have the tools and the knowledge to prevent and treat many diseases that once ravaged the world. But we must always remember the sacrifice and resilience of those who lived before us. Take comfort in the progress we've made and the legacy that we continue to carry forward. Humanity has faced the worst, and we continue to rise, learning, adapting, and caring for one another. The road from the ancient plagues to today's medical breakthroughs was long, but every step along the way has brought us closer to a healthier, more resilient world. So as you fall into a peaceful sleep tonight, remember that the fight against disease is never truly over. The future may bring new challenges, but together, we can face them, just as those before us did. The strength and determination of humanity will always shine through, no matter the darkness. Good night, and rest well, knowing that we are stronger together. As we carry the lessons of the past into a brighter future,